Welcome back to the beginner's course for consultants. Now, in the previous couple of lessons, I explained how to run different types of projects like implementation projects, training projects, audit projects, and so on. But the problem with those projects is that if some information leaks or if some material is used in an inappropriate way, then you'll have big problems as a consultant because you will lose your reputation and a client might sue you for this problem. So in today's lesson, I'll take you through four aspects that are important for security, privacy, and intellectual property. And these four aspects are legal and regulatory, client-specific requirements, ethical considerations, and technological and organizational aspects. So after you watch this video, you'll have a clear idea on how to protect your clients and therefore how to protect your own business. Okay, let's go first through this legal and regulatory. So from the privacy point of view, you have to take into account all the privacy laws that are existing in a particular country. So if you're operating in Europe, this is going to be GDPR, whereas basically all the other countries in the world also have some kind of privacy laws. And basically all of them say that you need to have a legal basis for processing any kind of personal data, and that you also have to delete any personal data that is not in use anymore. So when running a project as a consultant, you have to be aware of all of these things and make sure that you are complying with all of them. From the cybersecurity point of view, you have to be aware that certain industries are under certain regulations when it comes to security. For example, in the European Union, there is this NIS2, which regulates how critical infrastructure companies need to operate, but it also defines how those critical infrastructure companies have to deal with their own suppliers. And since you are a supplier to those companies, then you have to be aware of what NIS2 and local legislation that is based on NIS2 require. And similar thing is if you work for government agencies or if you work for financial organizations, again, there is this DORA regulation in Europe and others. So in any case, make sure that you check all the cybersecurity laws and regulations that are specific for the industry of this company that you work for. And the third types of laws or regulations are related to intellectual property rights. And basically in most of the countries, breaking intellectual property rights is a criminal offense. So this is something very serious and you have to be very careful with those things. And when it comes to intellectual property rights, you have to be very careful to specify with your clients who actually owns what. So for example, you should specify in your agreement that you own your methodology, that you own your templates. However, the outcome of the project, for example, the documents that you write for them are the property of the company that actually purchased these services from you. So as long as you distinguish who owns what, then you should be protected. Okay, the second aspect are client-specific requirements. And these requirements typically come in the form of certain clauses in the agreement, or you might have actually a separate NDA or non-disclosure agreement that this client requires you to sign. And there, in those clauses, a client actually might require you some things on top of what the laws or regulations are saying. So for example, from the privacy aspect, they might require from you that you are not using a ChatGPT or any other AI-based tools because they might actually be afraid that some information would leak this way. From security point of view, they might require you to use two-factor authentication or VPN or some other specific security tools. And from intellectual property point of view, they might actually require you that you upload all of the documents to their own server, not on your local disk or your local servers, so that they actually control their property. Of course, all of these are examples. You will see actually different requirements from different clients, but I'm just telling you some examples that are very common and that you can actually expect from clients to write and demand from you these kind of things. Okay, now let's go to this ethical aspect. So from the privacy point of view, what is ethical? One example might be that you should not speak to other people about your client or about people that work with your clients, because sometimes consultants want to impress some people that they're privately good with, or they want to impress their potential clients, and then they start actually speaking about too many specifics about some other clients. This is certainly not ethical, if not illegal. So in any case, make sure that you do not mention the specifics of any of your clients or people working for them. Now, from the security point of view, what is ethical? You actually might ask your clients if they're okay with you using certain tools, like, okay, I already mentioned ChatGPT or others. So even if they're not restricting the use of such tools, you can actually ask them upfront if they agree with the usage of particular tools, just to make sure that they are comfortable with these kind of tools. So again, this is not required that you do it, but this is something that is ethical actually from you to ask them. And from intellectual property point of view, ethical would mean that you're not simply, changing just a little bit of the documents that you created for this client, that you're changing them for some other client. Because some people might think that these changes are enough so that from the legal point of view, they cannot sue you. It might be so, but this is not ethical. You should make sure that you're not using basically the same materials for several clients. Rather, you should make sure that you're actually thoroughly adapting these documents, policies and procedures, or any other documents that you're creating for them so they are unique. Now, of course, if you have some templates that you use actually to adapt to each client differently, then of course it is ethical for you to use your own templates. But again, you need to adapt them thoroughly for each of your clients. And I also have this advanced course for consultants, and there is one lesson that speaks about ethical behavior of consultants. So if you're interested in this topic, please do take a look at this course. Now let's go for this last aspect, and this is technological and organizational. And basically this is the last one because this one is not required or this one is not, let's say, directly expected. This is something that you do beyond laws and regulations, beyond what the client is requiring, beyond what would be considered ethical. So this is something that is simply considered as a best practice that you should actually set as a kind of an internal rule for your own business. So from privacy point of view, an example would be that if you do use ChatGPT, if a client actually allows you to do something like this, then make sure that you're disabling that any input is shared with OpenAI, which is a company behind ChatGPT, so that they cannot use this for training their large language model. In other words, that you're preventing any potential leakage of information that you input into these chat applications. From a security point of view, make sure that you're using long passwords, that you're using password managers, so that you're backing up the data properly. You also might use some hardware tokens for accessing the most critical systems from your client. Of course, you have to physically protect your devices like a laptop, a smartphone, and any other devices that you're using when working with your clients. And you should also avoid using some free tools that you can download from the internet because they actually might be infected with malware. Now, from the intellectual property point of view, the best practice is actually to divide each of your client into a separate folder so that you cannot actually mix any materials between them. And this is very effective and simple way actually to avoid any problems. And basically this is it. If you consider privacy, security, and intellectual property through these four aspects, then you should be good because you then really thought through all the potential problems and actually ways to mitigate them. Okay, and I hope this was helpful. And this is actually the last lesson in this beginner's course for consultants. And now you are actually ready to start working with your first clients. And I wish you the best of luck with your first steps. Now, let me know in the comments below if you have any questions around security, privacy, or intellectual property, and I'll respond as soon as I can. And finally, here are a couple of materials that will help you learn more about this topic. So first of all, there is this advanced course for consultants where you will see lots of tips for consultants that are already a couple of years in this business. And as I mentioned, there is also one lesson that speaks about ethics. Second, you can take a look at this Secure and Simple podcast where I'm the host and I interview several successful cybersecurity consultants so that you can learn from them how they approach managing projects and how they actually protect their clients. And finally, in the description below, you'll find a link to an article which explains what are the 6 bases for legal processing of data according to GDPR. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel not to miss any of my new videos. And I publish videos about cybersecurity, compliance and governance every week. Thanks for watching.